still have a
Okay.
couple more mics that we try and get sorted. I think we are right there now.
All right, my friends. Good
Right.
afternoon.
Perfect.
Miss
All right,
Taylor,
well,
good afternoon. How everybody going? Yes.
I hope everyone is good.
All, yeah, man.
Right. Well, let's start. Today, it's my pleasure to be here. First of all, I want to thank the National Trust for inviting me to speak to each and every one of you. Thank you all for taking your time out of your busy schedules to be here, to hear what we have to say and just discuss a little bit about antiques, antique furniture really, and really antique furniture more related to Trinidad, where the National Trust operates out of. So it's my, as I said, it's my pleasure to be here as we go into the fascinating world of antique furniture. This is just a little speech that I wrote, so I'll just read this and it'll be a and then I'll be over that. It's just about that my career spans over approximately 3 decades. I've cultivated a profound passion for furniture that has only grown stronger with time. My journey into this craft began in my early years, influenced mainly by my grandmother, driven by curiosity and appreciation for the artistry involved in creating, preserving, restoring, reproducing beautiful and functional pieces of furniture. I would spend days with my grandmother, if you want to go to the next slide, um, who was the founder of Yesteryear, that most people already know as Mrs. Eileen Bynoe. These days were spent just chatting and learning about antiques, restoration, and the business in general. And it was my delight, but little did I know that my love affair was being created with antiques, restoration, and the fun challenges associated with furniture. All of this was further compounded by my father, who's also on the screen at the moment, who would always have something exciting story or be restoring something. And I would get little sneak peeks of these when they were being worked on as I grew up. So I was always surrounded by beautiful furniture, beautiful fine furniture. This love took me to the UK to further my education at London Guildhall University. We could go on to the next slide. It took me on to London Guildhall University, which is where I furthered my studies in furniture design. London Guildhall is one of the universities that are very well known for fine, well, for not only furniture, but art, jewelry, anything artistic really. It was a really good university for me at that time. Now, I also, while I was in the UK, did further short courses at Rycote College. There I did things like upholstery, stained glass, blacksmithing, just to name a few things. My time in the UK, I also worked in furniture stores where I held the positions of customer service manager to branch manager and so on. Go on to the next slide. This was not only educational, but fun. After my 10 years in the UK, I decided to return home, where contrary to my plan to open my own design studio, I ended up having a greater calling to work with the antiques. And as a result, I've taken over the family business, Yesteryear Antiques. So that's just a little backstory on who I am and how I ended up here talking to everyone about antiques and furniture, really. So, as I said, the trust that approached us to have this discussion, and I realized that it was one of great importance, one that we sort of need to try to figure out and see the purpose of different things. For example, we would have known growing up things like a food safe or an ice box or a coal pot and the tailoring irons and all the list of all these things goes on. These were all household items 100 years ago. But now we just see it as some weird stuff that some auntie or relative has on a cupboard or in a closet or on a shelf somewhere. So now we have an opportunity to figure out and understand what really is an antique. So we can go on to the next slide. Firstly, I want to say that not everything that is old is an antique. You know, there's lots of things that you might know being there for the longest while, but it's just an old piece of furniture. So we'll get into that in a little bit of detail so that we can sort of try to differentiate between what is old, what is antique, and what is a reproduction, and so on and so forth. We'll get into all those things. Now, just to give a little insight that the antiques, I would say anything that is an antique would be something that's like 120 years old and older, you know? Those are the things that have been around, and they will have all the characteristics, the fine details and stuff like that, of the carvings and the intricate joinery and so on. And anything that would be old would be something that would be, well, let's say 100 years old and newer, because that would just be when machinery started to come in and the attention to detail was not as significant as it was, or not significant, but it was not as handcrafted and individual as it would have been 120 years previous. So that's just a little insight. As I said, we'll get into it a little bit more. But what we'll go on to now is the caring of antiques, you know, because let's mix things around. Yes, we'll just go into the caring of antiques because I mixed my notes around. Sorry, everyone. Let's go to the caring of antiques. Actually, no. Let's go back and do it in the correct order. My apologies. Yeah, I think we'll go back. Should we? Yeah, let's go back to the definition. An antique piece, as I said, is typically 120 years old. The craftsmanship will show all of that. The materials that would be used in an antique piece would always be that much more. You can tell it's a older bit of wood. You can tell it's the hardware and stuff like that is more substantial. You can see the rarity of it, the condition, where even though it's well preserved, yeah, it'll be more desirable. So you can see all of that in the antique pieces. The collectible pieces would be, as I said, anything that's 100 years or newer. And they sometimes will be similar to the antiques in terms of they will have the good craftsmanship, but not as fine as the antique pieces would. And then, as we said, with the old furniture, that's everything that would be not as detailed, a lot more machinery, a lot more repetition. So all of that is what you would see, right? So now we can go on to the care for antiques. Sorry for the little mix-up, everyone. I hope you all are all following well. With antiques, as with most furniture, I would like to tell people to stay away from the harsh chemicals. You want to use mild solutions where possible. Things like, a lot of people like to use the Mr. Sheen and all these sorts of things. I try to say minimize that. Reason being, they can tend to leave a buildup on your furniture, and it can make it difficult as you go along to remove without harming the finish of your furniture. So just clean it regularly, dust it, use a soft cloth, use mild solutions of soap if you feel you need to. Avoid the harsh chemicals. You want to stay away of all the abrasive cleaners, the things that have like the Vim and Sif and all these things that will actually strip the finish on the furniture. Things like the humidity and the temperature. You don't want to have those fluctuating too much, because that will also cause movement in the wood and can cause long-term damage. Polishing, depending on the finish, as I said, just use something like a chamois leather with water. I find that tends to work well. Again, less is more. So just stick with simple damp cloth, don't soak it, and that usually helps. Again, in the care of furniture, you'll come across things like you'll have scratches and dents in your furniture, and you want to know what to do about that. Again, you have to be a little mindful, because you don't want to go and try to do something that's irreversible. If it's a temporary measure or something that is easily reversible, go ahead, give it a try. There are things like touch-up markers and stuff like that. That works usually pretty well. Once you're careful and you have a steady enough hand and enough of an eye for detail. But when you get to the deep scratches and dents, I would always say consider going to a professional restorer, because you can end up doing more damage than what was there before, especially if you start involving things like digging it up and putting irreversible repairs that you don't really want to end up doing if necessary. So with your furniture, in the care, when it comes to handling it and moving it, you want to be careful how you lift and how you move your furniture. You don't want to just come and grab, any part of it and drag it. Remember, these things being over 120 years old, the joints, they don't, while they'll hold up most of the time.
Your mic is muted.
Mr. Bynoe,
Mr. Bynoe, your mic is
your
muted.
mic muted. Yep.
Audio. All right.
There we go.
My apologies.
Not a
I don't
problem.
know, where did I lose you? All right. Well, I think we were just talking about the moving of furniture. So you just want to be careful on how you move your furniture, so that you don't end up doing more harm than good. You want to lift from the rails or from somewhere that is sturdy, something that can't come off, like a table. You don't want to lift from the tabletop itself if it's got an overhang from the side rail, because you lift on that tabletop and that can pull away from the rest of the table, especially if the rest of the table is heavy. Something like a china cabinet on tall, delicate legs. If you try to drag that, you're going to snap the legs off. Things like that will easily happen if you're moving furniture. So be careful with it. And although it might sound silly to say, avoid overloading your furniture. You have, again, I'll use a china cabinet as an example. You have a beautiful display of expensive crystal that you want to put on show. You cannot put 10 tons of crystal onto a thin glass shelf. It's not going to work. And you're going to end up destroying your crystals, your cabinet, etc., etc. So it might sound simple, but I've seen it many times where people think, oh, it's just a set. But then be in mind that those things, the shelves are usually just held on by, little pegs in the corners. So you have to be careful with that. And then in the care of antiques, eventually it'll come down to professional restoration. If you have a piece of furniture and it needs restoration, and especially if it's a valuable piece, especially if it's an old piece, you want to make sure you leave that for someone that knows exactly what they're doing, so that your piece will actually last, So now we could go on to the next slide, which is where I got mixed up, and I told you all about this already. We did all of that already. Old, collectible, and antique. So I think we have a good insight on that. Old, as I said, being something that is before, before 80, about 80 years old and newer. That would be something old. Remember, a lot of these pieces can be reproductions, And you will be able to realize it's a reproduction by the fact that the hinges, the hardware, the manner in which the pieces put together, you can see that it was mass produced or mass done, and that would just be an old piece done in a new style, in an old style, sorry. A collectible piece, again, would be anything about 100 years old, sorry, thereabouts. And that would be something where you will still see a good quality of construction. You will still see a very beautiful piece. It still has value, and it still has charm, because it's just as you cross over from individual pieces, individually made custom pieces, which would be antique, to duplicates and tribute pieces to the antiques that were done. So they can be collectible. And then obviously we have the antique, which is 120 years, go further back, you know. Those are the pieces where you would see that they were handmade and they were more custom tailored pieces, more one-off pieces than mass produced. You would usually find similarities in styles rather than dead duplicates. Yeah. And then they would also have changed from one period to the next. We could go on to the next slide now. Because here we're going to talk now just about restoration and conservation. We could do the next slide. As we'll see there, restoration is when you return a piece of furniture to its original condition, which may involve repairs, new finishes, changing of pieces, parts, hardware, etc. Because the idea of restoring something is you bring it right back to brand new, to as fine as it could be. Conservation would be where you're preserving the existing materials and structure with minimal intervention to maintain the integrity of the piece. Now, what do I mean by that? I think so that is just to maintain the integrity of the piece. So you want to try to, wherever possible, remain without altering anything at all. So if anything is damaged, you try to repair it using its own pieces rather than replacing it with something new, right? So what I'll do now is, if we go on to the next slide, right? This is just to give you an example of a restoration. This is a piece that I got a couple of years ago, right? Now, I get the feeling there's someone inside this chat. I know I told him to have a look out. He would know this piece. It's a really, really beautiful piece, as you would see when we move forward. But when you look at a piece like this, most people would think this is rubbish. This is something to throw away. This belongs in the scrap heap. But it is not always the truth of the matter. You see, a piece like this is hard for the average person to think can ever come back. But once you start looking into the world of antiques and looking into things, you can then realize that pieces, once the important bits are there, and you can see that it's not overtaken by rot and it's not overtaken by, all being broken in all the wrong places. Now, what has happened with this piece is this piece has pretty much fallen apart because of time, because of neglect, because of being in the wrong place. The people that used to own the piece, probably, a door might have fallen, the door might have fallen off, and they decided, you know what, let's put it outside, or let's put it in the laundry room. It ended up in the laundry room, and then it just further got worse and worse and worse. But by knowing that how this piece goes together, I was able to look at it and realize that no, I think I can save this piece. That and the fact that I've always loved these pieces and wanted one for myself. So I decided I would put the blood, sweat, and tears into it and make it my own. So as you see, the drawer of this one, which is a big open space at the top, the drawer there, we did have the original drawer, but all of the makeup of it was all broken and stuff like that. So we had lots of things to replace. As you can see, the drawer on the left-hand side was totally gone, and it didn't have any legs for it to stand on. So after a lot of blood, sweat, and tears and hard work, we could go on to the next slide and see what a restored piece comes out looking like. So that there is the same piece of furniture. We had a lot of work to do to bring it back, but as you could see, it's the same original door. It's the same sides. The door on the left-hand side as you face the piece, that door, the majority of that had to be remade, but we had to do things that would try to keep it as non-noticeable as possible when you look at the piece of furniture. So things like choosing the right pattern of grain pattern of wood and so on and so forth. Those are all the important things that you have to do when you are doing a restoration. It's not easy, it's not for the faint of heart, and it's not something that you can just wake up in the morning and say, yeah, I think I'm gonna restore a piece of furniture, especially if it's as bad as this. When you get to this sort of stage, definitely that's something you want to let somebody else do, you know. We can go on to the next slide, which I will just give you another look into another piece that we restored. This was actually a set of Morris furniture. The picture on the left-hand side of your screen, you will see all the pieces and parts. The chair that is actually standing I rested all those pieces together just so that I can get a feel for what the piece was going to look like. But again, a lot of blood, sweat, and tears, and we got the whole set back together again. And the picture on the right of the screen, that is what it finished up looking like. So we ended up getting the whole set to look brand new again. Again, some pieces would have had to be changed, and some we were able to salvage and reuse. We can go on to the next slide, which will show another restoration piece, which is the chaise longue. Now, on the left-hand side, you can see it in its original condition, legs broken off, cane busted, bit of the carving on the back missing, etc., etc. And on the right-hand side, you'll see the piece completed, cane redone, the carving reconstructed on the top of the chaise, casters put on, and so on and so forth. So the piece was brought back to its original glory. And if we go on to the next slide, you'll see another piece that was also restored. So same thing, all fresh cane and carvings all redone, cleaned out if they had paint and stuff like that. So that's just a different piece that we restored as well. We can go on to the next slide, which just gives a little insight to conservation. Now, this piece that we're looking at here is a library chair. It's an English piece, and what this shows is what, I think this is a very good depiction of what conservation is. Now, this chair would originally have had horsehair fillings on the inside, which is what would have been used in, you know, the earlier times, the 1800s and so on. So a piece like this, when it comes in, I had problems because the seat had actually fallen out. All the insides were showing from underneath, and it was dull and so on and so on. But I had liked how the piece looked at the time and decided it's something worth conserving rather than restoring. it had its charm, it had its look about it, it had the wear on the handles, and you can see the leather on the front, which was the original leather. You can see that sort of wearing through, and it sort of told a story. And that was something that I decided at the time that I wanted to just conserve the piece. So it's a different way of attacking something. Whereas with restoration, you would take things apart and make it good and then put the whole piece back together. With conservation, you don't always have the ability to take things apart. So like this, if I decided to take the upholstery off, it would never go back on and it would never look the way it should. So you had to work backwards. I ended up having to get the seat to show up properly, as in put everything back up inside, fill it up so that the seat looked smooth and everything like that. And I did all that work from underneath. So that is just the difference between conservation, because I didn't want to disturb the upholstery on that. Whereas with the chaise lounge, you have the ability to, like with the cane, when the cane is gone, I had the ability to take all the cane out and put in fresh cane, make the whole thing look good. I didn't need to conserve that piece, I needed to restore that piece. So with this one, I do have, I could have restored it if I wanted, which would mean getting new upholstery and stripping off all the old finish that was there and starting afresh. And I did eventually restore that piece. We could go on to the next slide for conservation as well. This again is another beautiful piece. It's a Victorian sideboard. It is a very fine example of what a nice piece of furniture is. It has all the characteristics, the carvings, it has the early veneer and stuff like that, which really was a beautiful piece. And I decided that I don't want to have it all brand new. I like it when a piece can tell a story. I like that you can see that it's been lived in. I mean, I love a restored piece as well, but a piece like this with the sort of age behind that, I decided no, that one, let's conserve it and just keep it, you know, as original as we could for as long as we could. So that's what I did with that one. So now that's that on restoration and conservation. What I'll do now is sort of give a little bit of an idea on Caribbean pieces of furniture. How do we tell something is a Caribbean piece of furniture? If we go on to the next slide, you'll see on that picture, you'll see on the left of the screen what we all know as a food safe. The middle is a gramophone, and on the right would be an armoire. Now, the picture on the left, which is the food safe, we all know that as a Caribbean piece. We know that as an antique. And we can tell that we can tell that it's an original piece. We can tell it's an old piece. You can look at it. This one has been restored. You can see the replacement of the mesh and so on and so forth. But that's not something that is usually reproduced. So that one, you can tell there is an antique piece. Now, there are several key things to look for. The materials, Caribbean furniture is usually made out of local hardwoods, the mahogany, the cedar, the lignum vitae, all these different sorts of woods that most of us we can usually tend to tell when you look at imported pieces or foreign pieces. Wood grain is slightly different, usually lighter in color, but ours tends to be the darker, heavier types of wood. When you look at the craftsmanship of these pieces as well, you can see the irregularities in the joinery, you can see the hand carving, you can see where joints and so on were made using hand tools, which is not present in the newer pieces. So that way, that's how you can usually tell that a piece is a nice old Caribbean piece. The style that we would have had in the Caribbean would usually depict the colonial style. So we would start to see things from the British, from the French, from the Spanish designs. We can see the curves, the carvings, and all those different things that would reflect the cultural influence of that region of that time. And you would see the Caribbean flair to it, and that's how you know, again, that that's a Caribbean piece. You look out for the wear and the patina of a piece, and you can see the signs of age, you know, where the surfaces, they start fading. You can see that the piece has been used and cherished over time. That is one of the key indicators that you have an old piece of furniture. Provenance is not very easy to find in Trinidad. No, sorry, when I say provenance, I mean, when you're talking about the provenance of a piece, you're talking about who has used the piece before, what is the significant historic value of that piece. So if a piece does have provenance, that's great. It's very, very seldom that you get it. At least in Trinidad, I find it's very difficult in all the decades of doing this to get pieces that you can actually prove without a doubt that it did belong to who it belonged to. The joinery techniques as well. There are a lot of things that you will notice in older pieces of furniture that you can tell that now is an antique piece of furniture. More modern pieces, you would tend to see quick fasteners, things like screws, Allen keys, all those sorts of things. You will see those in the modern pieces. You're not going to see them in the older pieces. Definitely not going to see them in the Caribbean old pieces. If you're ever unsure about a specific piece, just consult an antique expert or someone that can appraise pieces, especially someone that has history or knowledge in Caribbean furniture. They can help you verify that piece. Yeah. We can go on to the next slide where we'll just see some other pieces of antique furniture. Again, nice Caribbean examples, the four-poster bed. Those would usually have the leaf motif, or especially down in the Southern Caribbean, we tend to have a lot of the leaves. You go further up, Barbados, Jamaica tend to use a lot of the pineapple influence rather on their carving. So on their four-poster beds, you would see the carving being slightly different, leaning towards those things. In the other photo, we have another antique armoire, which was also restored. And the chair there, that's a Regency chair, which has the English influence. Very beautiful chairs. I love them. They're extremely comfortable. So let's just go on to identifying antiques, which I think we just covered. So you just, as I said, we just look for the local hardwoods, the handcrafting signs and specific design styles that would have been influenced by the colonial designs. And we'll check for the natural patina, the provenance, the hardware and traditional joinery wherever possible. Fake antique now, you have to be very careful because there are lots of those around, and it's very difficult in many instances to tell the difference, but you have to check for the materials. There are a lot of places, remember when they were making the antiques, they would use the best of the best. The reason someone usually reproduces something is because they want to make a quick buck. So they would not use the traditional materials. They would use poor quality, poor selection. They'd use particle board, MDF, and stuff like that. The construction techniques would also be different. You would see where they're supposed to have intricate joinery, where they were supposed to have mortise and tenon joints or dovetail joints. They'd use staples, they'd use screws and stuff like that. You also can tell a lot from the hardware of a piece of furniture. Look at the quality of the hardware. Remember, on a fake, usually they're trying to make a quick turnover, so the hardware would normally be cheaper. So you would see thinner handles, all those sort of telltale signs. The hinges wouldn't be consistent, and so on and so forth. Documentation, well, if it's a fake, chances are they'll have no documentation, or they will literally just try to fake that as well because they're into faking. So that sort of should give us a little insight into antiques and what it's all about. I would hope that there are quite a few questions. I would love to hear what people would like to find out about. If I've missed anything, if there's anything anyone wants a little more clarification on, I'll be glad to help. That's what I'm here for. So I think at this stage, we probably will open to any questions.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, sir. My friends, please use the chat if you have any questions, concerns that we want to bring up with Mr. Bynoe. So immediately, sir, thank you very much for the presentation and for your insight into the world of antiques.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. My pleasure.
Now, I'm bringing it back at one time. You talk about the fakes versus the antiques, the actual antiques, right?
Yes.
And then you use the term reproduction.
All right.
Right? So could you give me a little bit more in terms of a reproduction versus a fake? And then, well, we know the antiques.
All right. Well, okay, a reproduction is pretty much a fake, right? But what you have in terms of a fake and a reproduction, I think it depends on the person trying to get rid of it or the person that has it. When you think about it, if someone has a fake something, they're aware that they're usually trying to pass it off as an original. So you would buy a fake Rolex. You wouldn't buy a reproduction Rolex. Because a reproduction would mean that you're going through all the steps to make it as solid and sound as possible. And if you're going to go through all that work, you might as well just buy an original Rolex. So when you're dealing with antiques, a fake as opposed to a reproduction would still have structural integrity. It would still be a good piece of furniture. It would still be, it would never hold the value that an antique piece would, but it would at least be a good piece of furniture. Whereas with a fake, it's someone that just wants to get quick money. They have a little idea and they do something, they do it poorly, and the person buying it ends up with firewood.
Understood completely. Understood completely.
Yeah.
And again, your presentation touched on appraising, right? Where we may have a piece at home, we're not sure what category it might fall in. It might be old, antique, or collectible. So firstly, what would be like the cost generally for an appraisal? We have a question in the chat asking about that.
Oh, that's a good question. And it's one that I very seldom can answer off the bat. You see, when you come to do a valuation of something, it quite often depends on the piece. It depends on the number of pieces, etc., etc. So for me, when someone asks me to do a valuation, it goes based on pretty much on how much research is necessary and how deep into the valuation the client wants. If someone, which I've done from time to time, someone wants a valuation on a very simple, very common piece, then no problem. It's very easy for me to just turn around and say, well, look, a piece like that would normally sell for X amount of dollars. in the condition that it's in, you might get Y amount of dollars. If it's in showroom condition, blah, blah, I can do that sometimes. But when someone wants all the detailed information that you're now going to have to go and do research for, which I've done before. I've had a client ask me to source all the information on a piece of furniture and based on the maker's mark that was on the furniture. Again, Caribbean furniture usually does not have maker's marks. But in restoring the piece, I came across the maker's mark and I told the client, hey, look, you know, there's a maker's mark here. And they said, well, Ross, could you find out about it for me? And I was like, yeah, no problem. And I went and I did weeks and weeks of research, sent emails, letters, etc., etc., found out exactly who made the piece, when it was made, and all these different things. And it does take time. So then again, because they wanted that level, there was a cost attached to that. Yeah. So
cool. Thank you very much. And another question in the chat. In terms of insurance, what would be your recommendation for that? And maybe a little bit on the documentation you think local insurance agencies may require.
Well, most of the times with with insurance, at least in Trinidad, again, I don't know of the different Caribbean islands, what their rules are like. But most of the times our antiques would just go under house contents. If again, what they would do in case of a claim is they would then need to have some form of documentation to say the piece was worth this or was worth that. And fortunately, unfortunately, depending on how the cookie crumbles, sometimes I would be able to have a photograph of the piece, or I may have known the piece, or I may have restored the piece for the client. Because remember, antiques is a relatively niche market. So I do tend to know quite a few of the people that do have antiques and do collect and may be familiar with the pieces. So I can then give them a note, a letter to carry to the insurance to say, well, a piece like that could be worth between X and Y dollars. Which I have done in the past as well.
So thank you very much for that. Now, we had mentioned about the markers from the makers, right? And one of the most popular, at least for me, would be the Morris chairs, right?
Yeah.
And I had one at home by my grandmother, and you cast it up there, no problem.
Yeah.
So what would be your thoughts on the Morris chair? 1, 2, in terms of its age as well. How old do you think these pieces are? And who is Morris?
All right. Well, coincidentally, I was thinking about that just the other day. Morris chairs, I think it was by an English guy, William Morris. He's the one that I believe started that whole Morris chair movement. Because again, out of England, his style of Morris chair is very different to ours. But when I say very different, sorry, it is different to ours in exact appearance. But then remember, we were settled by the British. So my thought is that the Morris chairs, we did our own interpretation of it when the British workers came down here. So his style of furniture was very nice. He was a celebrated, artist, sort of craftsman. He did a lot of wallpaper and textiles and stuff like that. But his furniture definitely, I think, left his mark. And as you said, nearly everybody has Morris furniture somewhere or knows somebody that has Morris furniture. They're very comfortable, they're very nice, they're very attractive, very affordable, and I think also a good investment because they just keep going up in price because they're some of the more reasonable pieces to purchase.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. And you also alluded to the skills that would be necessary for restoration and conservation. one of the skills that you mentioned is caning, right?
Yeah.
Firstly, where does find them thing? And secondly, and this is the question in the chat, where else is this done other than the Blind Welfare Association?
All right. Well, again, with anything furniture restoration wise, I can handle. You see how I work with the restoration of pieces is I have a vast network of craftsmen and women throughout Trinidad and Tobago. We could handle nearly anything that comes with furniture when a piece needs doing. Cane is one of those. So if something needs caning, I can do it. I would always first off tell people support the blind welfare. That's what they do. That's their thing. If you're in a hurry, your back is up against the wall, you want to get something done, and you want to get it done quickly, no problem. I'm more than willing to help. I can get it done for you. There are very few people that I do know outside of the blind welfare that can and will do it. Reason being, it's very time consuming. I mean, it's sort of like when you think of cars nowadays, you no longer see a straightener and painter. You will see people changing panels, you know?
Yeah.
And it's just because people are more concerned with the quick turnover of things and getting their money in than preserving something and being true to the history of a piece, or say just saving a piece of history. Because once you restore a piece of furniture, that's what you're doing. You're saving a piece of history.
Understood.
And,
yeah.
So yeah.
Okay, cool. And again, thank you very much for the insight there. Now, in terms of the differences between the restoration and the conservation, right? And then what is an authentic piece in terms of the in terms of the antique, sorry. Could you just kind of repeat the differences, please? I'm going to see if I can find that in the slides, but
all right.
yeah.
So just to clarify, you want the difference between an antique and
the reproduction piece.
Okay.
Right?
All right.
And then what makes it an antique kind of thing. And then, well, of course, I have the restoration and conservation differences on the slide there.
All right. So restoration and conservation, I think we should be kind of clear on that. But the restoration, as I said, is, imagine you have something that is no longer functioning. It's no longer working. It's in pieces. It's in shambles. It's missing parts. It's broken. Things are broken. You can only restore something like that because it's no longer any good of any use to anyone. So when you're restoring a piece like that, you're changing whatever needs to be changed, repairing whatever needs to be repaired, and getting the piece back up functional and in showroom condition again. So now it's restored and ready to go. Conservation, the piece needs to be already functioning. So it needs to at least be standing. It needs to at least be usable, or at least not in a state of borderline disrepair. And then you can conserve something. When you're conserving it, you're trying to be as gentle as possible in having to change anything or any part. You want to try to support what's there and keep the piece usable without changing anything, without changing anything if you can avoid it, you know?
I get you.
So that's the restoration and conservation. Now, if we go into an antique versus a reproduction, an antique, again, you're looking 100, 120 years old and older. Reproduction would be when you take a piece that is 120 years old You look at that piece and you think, I want to have one of those in my house. But I don't have the money to buy the original. I want to reproduce it, right? So you now look at that piece and take all the details of that piece, copy it as best as you possibly can, and then build that piece. You have now have a reproduction. I'll give you an example of exactly how that works. Many years ago, when I sort of just started in the business, I was at the shop with my grandmother. I don't know if this client is on as well, but you'll probably remember. I was in the shop and we had this cabinet. It was a cabinet from about the 1880s that my grandmother had purchased and restored for herself. But in the restoration of that piece, there were many parts of it that needed to be repaired. So she had liked it so much that while she was doing it, she said, I'm going to reproduce it. So while she was doing it, as you're doing over the carving for the crown and the carving for the doors and so on, she did a duplicate of each individual piece. So everything was done to the button. So everything is a perfect reproduction. So she did that and had the original at her home and had put the reproduction in this store. Client came in, looked at it, said it's lovely. My grandmother said, no, bear in mind, it's a reproduction. Said, oh God, no. I want no reproductions. She said, no problem. Well, I can give you the original. She said, I have the original at home. So if you want the original, you can have the original, or you can have the reproduction. Both of them are perfect. She said, I will keep whichever one you don't want. That's no problem. So she told the client the cost of the original versus the cost of the reproduction. And bought the reproduction. You know, because you realize, I mean, when he did look at it, he realized that it was properly made. There were, you don't have all the telltale signs of the wear, the scratches, the dents, all the growing pains that an antique has. It didn't have all of that. And it was a beautiful piece. And again, the gentleman, he knew his things. So he looked at it and he couldn't tell it was a reproduction. And as I told him, I was like, well, if you can't tell, how many other people can't? So by all means. And he said, yeah, well, you know, you're making some sense. I'll save some money, I'll get it. And he was happy. I think he still has a piece to today.
Fantastic.
And, yeah.
Well, good afternoon, sir. And as I understand in the chat, so good afternoon. But this brings us smoothly into this one of the final questions. What are the best practices for qualifications to be an antique appraiser, and who are the qualified authorities?
Boy, I'll tell you what, the best way to put that as who is the best appraiser is someone with knowledge, someone with time and length of service. You see, what we have going on in Trinidad now, we have a very big upsurge of secondhand sales and of used furniture. It's a big market at the moment, and it's something that is actually not doing much good for the genuine antique trade, because you have a lot of people who, they like nice things, they have an idea about antiques, but they don't know about antiques. And I see it many times on social media where people advertise things as antiques. And to me, because I've been in it for decades, I can tell from the photograph that it's not an original antique, but it's being marketed as an antique. And I mean, as everyone knows with social media, you have enough likes, you have enough friends or whatever it is, and people start believing you. But without the knowledge and the time and being down in the trenches and feeling, touching, knowing and understanding the makeup of antiques, people can be very easily misled. So it's to say there's an easy way to find someone to appraise, there isn't. We don't have any governing body or any antiques group like they would have in the UK and stuff. They would have these antique societies or whatever they call them, where they have a whole database of antique people. But remember, in Trinidad, we've been, my family has been associated with antiques since before I was born. Since in the 60s, we've been doing antiques, probably even before that. And I can't think of, bar the McLeod family, that was the only other long-standing antique store that I could think of in Trinidad. I mean, there have been people that have come and have gone that have dabbled in antiques or have stores that will sell reproductions that look like antiques and try to class themselves as antique stores. But as far as antiques go, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, I can't think of many others that do antiques. So to say if there's anyone else that could do a proper valuation, I can't think of where to send anyone.
Well, this would thank you for the answer, but and this would kind of segue us nicely into the next question. How do we contact an antique appraiser in Trinidad and or Tobago? Just tell them it on the slide.
It's on the screen.
It is on the screen.
It's on the screen. I mean,
Nicely.
I do it. It's not a service that I readily, it's not often asked for. And usually it's just people that want to have an idea of how much to sell a piece for. So wherever I can help, easy to get a hold of. All my information is up there.
Yep.
Shoot me an email, shoot me a WhatsApp. WhatsApp is always the easiest way to get a hold of me. Emails, I'm very I'm very slow in responding. But yeah, just shoot me a WhatsApp and I'll see how I can help. Always there.
Cool. And so for the final question, because I'm mindful of the time, the final question, my friends, how does restoration affect the resale value of an antique?
That is a very good question.
Heavy question. Yeah.
A very, very good question. And what I will say is it sort of depends on the antique piece, and it also depends on the person that owns it. If you are doing a piece strictly for resale, and the piece has provenance, the piece is made by a particular maker or something like that, and that is of significant importance, then you want to try to conserve a piece like that. You don't want to restore it. You don't want to mess with the finishings and stuff like that. But the reality for, and again, I'll speak for Trinidad, the reality for Trinidad and Trinidadians is we usually want pieces that are showroom condition. So we want everything clean, everything polished, everything relacquered, everything handles changed or whatever. We want it all looking like brand new. So we don't usually, our Trini market, we don't usually do things to with resale as the major factor. So whereas internationally, I would say people, they don't want you to mess with the patina. Here we want it looking brand spanking new. So that's why I say it's a difficult question to answer.
It's on case-by-case basis, I guess.
Yeah, and again, remember, if you are keeping the piece in your family, as I told one client once, they had a lovely chair and they wanted to paint it electric blue, and I told them, go straight ahead, no problem, because we can always take that off and put it back to wood again. You can do those things. You do have the flexibility to do those things. And if you are going to be keeping the piece of furniture, if you want to sell it and then you bring it back to its original glory, who's going to know that you painted it pink, purple, blue, polka dotted down the line? You know, as long as it's done properly and done with respect for the piece, you can pretty much do what you want.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Thank you very much for that. Now, my friends in the chat, tell them thank you. Tell them Sir, thank you very much for the presentation and for the insight into the world of antiques. Having listened to the presentation, I have a greater appreciation for some of the pieces that I have at home. I have a
Good.
table at home that was just a table. And
I
it
remember your
really-
table.
and I have memories, I have memories of being around the table, but now I have a deeper appreciation for the physical item itself. So again, thank you very much for that. And I'm sure everyone else has the same experience in listening to you and understanding the craft. And my friends, everybody who in this chat, firstly, in this meeting, is a member yet? Member of the National Trust? I'm looking at all of you all. Right, nicely.
So we have
Bring
new
a
members coming
friend.
on board.
Yes, bring a friend. Join the National Trust. We are about preserving and safeguarding our heritage. All right. So please join us and be part of this movement of saving our heritage. Now, specifically with the antiques. This is part one, my friends, part one. And I'm happy that all of y'all are here with us, right? Part one. The second part of this thing, we have an antique sale, my friends. So we have an idea. We can't say that we could identify it, but we have an idea as to what the antiques would look like and so on, and the collectibles and so forth. We have an antique sale right here at Millefleur, just behind me. Right here on the 16th to the 23rd of November. And if you would like to have your piece up for sale, you can send pictures of the piece to info@nationaltrust.tt, info@nationaltrust.tt, or give us a call and then we will guide you along. All right, so the antique sale, the 16th to the 23rd of November. And for those who would like to have their pieces put up for sale, please send your pictures to info@nationaltrust.tt. All right. I hope you're taking all of that down. info@nationaltrust.tt. The antique sale begins on the 16th of November and continuing on to the 23rd of November. All right. So, Mr. Bynoe, do you have any final words for us?
Well, first of all, I want to tell everyone thank you for taking time out of your day to come to listen to me waffle on about what I really enjoy and what's my passion. It's a pleasure to be here. Look forward to seeing you all and your friends and your family from the 16th to the 23rd at Millefleur. Let's see how many lovely pieces we can get out for everyone to come and have a look at. Even if you don't want to buy something, just come down, see it. Let's have a chat. Let's have a talk. Let's get more into saving the history of the country and where we're from. Yeah.
Thank you very much. And again, I just checked through the chat and everybody, thank you for the presentation. Fantastic work. Looking forward to the next session. Wonderful. And again, Mr. Bynoe, thank you very much for the effort that you put into the presentation for today and for the work that you do and continue to do in preserving the antiques of our Caribbean and part and parcel of our identity, right? So at
one
this
more
time,
thing.
sure.
Thank you very much to the National Trust and all of you all that helped me get this done, because it was a team effort. It was a team effort.
We had a good time. We had a good time. We had a good time.
Yes. Yeah.
So my friends, this is the time where we have the refreshments. So need you to turn left and go down the corridor to the right and open your fridge as normal. We have the refreshments there for you. Thank you all again very much for joining us. And don't forget the antique sale from the 16th to the 23rd of November. All right. And also join us at the National Trust. You can join on the website. You can come in at Millefleur, find any one of us. We will have a form for you to join. So my friends, enjoy the rest of your evening. And again, Mr. Bynoe, thank you, thank you, thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me. Have a good night, everyone.
Good evening, evening.
Thank you.